Ethan left a white card on the table as if dropping a dare into a teacup. It read, "I'll give you $100,000 if you serve me in Chinese." Phones lifted like small moons. Laughter and pity braided into one sound. Grace put her hand over the card and felt the room tilt under her palm. She could take the money and buy breathing space, or refuse and keep her name whole. Either way, the camera had already been invited to decide what she was worth. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. I have been watching Grace for as long as the neon sign over the cafe has been a little crooked, long enough to know the small, true things that do not fit on a resume. She ties her hair back the same way every morning, as if the loop itself could hold the day together. Her hands move with a careful speed, the kind that can carry a tray, soothe a stranger's grief, and hide the shake of a heart that has kept too many small, hard secrets. Grace Mitchell was 28 and worked the early shift at a place called the Blue Lantern. The city around the diner woke in pieces, delivery trucks, a stray dog barking at the river, a man in a suit who always read the same business section until his coffee went cold. The Blue Lantern smelled of burned sugar and lemon polish. The light was thin and honest through rain-streaked windows. Grace wore an apron with a faded logo, and in the pocket of that apron she kept a small, folded list of names written in different hands, a reminder of who she was answering for when the plates were empty and the tips were small. There is a softness to her that surprises people who meet her only at the counter. She has a laugh that comes quiet at first, then spreads, like sun through old blinds. But there's a part of her that is always calculating. Counts change twice, checks a bell 3 times before stepping back, watches the door as if time might slip through it. She was raised to be careful. It sat in family stories like a well-worn prayer. Her mother, Sarah, had taught her how to steely hope, hold it close, name it only when necessary. Grace's skin held the warmth of late afternoon coffee. Her eyes were dark and steady, often looking past whatever was in front of her. She could make a plate of eggs feel like an apology and a slice of pie feel like permission to breathe. Customers loved that about her. The small human light she gave away without asking for anything in return. But the bills stacked up behind that light. Rent was an enemy she chased into every night shift. Sarah's pills came first, then the landlord's letter. Then the little notices from the phone company that used to sweeten their conversations with threats. Grace learned the arithmetic of worry. She could tell you how many hours she'd need to work to buy a week of calm. On mornings when the city felt cruel and generous in equal measures, she would press her forehead to the cool diner window and watch rain silver the street. There was a notebook she kept beneath the counter, the cover frayed. Every page a cramped map of languages she had taught herself from borrowed books and the mouths of travelers. English came like home, easy and plain. Spanish tasted like laughter. French curled like smoke. Mandarin lay in the quiet of her jaw the way a hidden song does, and she kept 9 languages folded in the way one keeps a lucky coin. It was knowledge she had gathered like seeds, small, unassuming, waiting for the right soil. People at the Blue Lantern saw only the surface. The waitress who remembered their orders, the smile that came with the coffee refill. But the empathy that moved through her came from a sharper place, from nights counting heartbeats in the dark, from the ache of being asked to be less than she was so others could feel larger. There had been doors closed softly in her face, opportunities replaced with polite refusals, moments when her talents were explained away with reasons she had been taught to swallow. Those memories were thin ghosts in her steps. That morning the air carried a cold that had teeth. Rain rattled on the diner's metal awning. Grace moved through her tasks with the practiced choreography of survival. Cups, sugar, the careful slide of the tip jar toward the edge of the counter so customers would notice. She folded napkins by habit, each crease an order in a private language. At the corner table sat a man she saw sometimes, not always a regular, but a type, well-dressed, pocket-watch lean, the sort of person whose shoes seemed to have been edited by money. He watched the world with a pleasant curiosity of someone who could afford to be amused by other people's small dramas. The man left a folded business card on the table when he stood to leave, the ink embossed and smug. Grace picked it up, the paper cool, between her fingers. The card said his name, Ethan Carmichael. No other mark. He did not look like trouble. Trouble often announced itself noisily. It wore a different kind of desperation. Ethan's trouble, if trouble it was, wore silk and a smile like a challenge. There are moments that tilt the world without fanfare. Grace did not notice the tilt at first. She was balancing a stack of plates, humming a half-remembered hymn. Later, when she folded the business card into her apron and smoothed the crease, she would think of how small things shift the map. She would remember the way the light on Ethan Carmichael's face had shown no pity for the history folded under hers. For now, there was the rhythm of coffee, the clink of spoon against ceramic, the regular humiliation of arithmetic that asks you to make peace between what you need and what you can get. Outside, the city became a blur of umbrellas and yellow taillights. Inside, Grace's world was small and honest. Orders called and answered, a tip here and there, a child's sticky fingers. She moved like someone who had learned to carry weight without making a sound about it. She was careful with voice and with jokes, with the way she let people see her. But care can be heavy in a body that is always giving. It can set a pressure under the ribs that no smile will lift. If something wanted to find a place to start, it would pick mornings like this, ordinary days that hold the shape of something else. Grace's pockets contained lint, a folded bus ticket, a photo of Sarah with thinner hair, and a laugh she was trying to save. Her name threaded through the pages of her little notebook, written in English first, then in the looping characters of Mandarin, the quick strokes of Arabic, the patient letters of German. Each language was a promise she had made to herself, to never be small when words could make her large. I watched her at the edge of the counter, hands moving a quiet hymn of service. There's a kind of courage that makes no sound until later. It is shown in steadiness, the way a person returns to the same small duties without dramatics. Grace carried that courage like a coin. You might not notice it unless you had learned to look. She did not know it yet, but the city, through a man with a crisp card and a smile ready to test the limits of decency, would ask her to trade that coin in for something heavier than she imagined. The question would not be simple, and the answer would cost more than money. For now, the blue lantern hummed its ordinary prayer. Light coffee, doors opening and closing, people coming and going under the indifferent sky. The bell above the diner door made its small, honest sound, and then the world changed shape. He came back during the lunch rush, as if by design. Ethan Carmichael had the kind of timing that suggested rehearsal, cufflinks catching the light, a briefcase that smelled faintly of citrus and old money, the same quiet smile. A man in a quiet suit does not shout. He moves through a room the way a storm moves through a town, with intent that hides itself in small details. Grace noticed him before the others did. Her hands were wet with dishwater. The steam hung around her like a thin shawl. She wiped a mug on her apron and watched Ethan choose a booth by the window, as if he wanted to be framed by the city. He did not order at once. He watched people. The father trying to calm a toddler, the woman on a hurried phone call, the two teenagers who always shared a milkshake. There was a patience to his watching that made the room feel suddenly under inspection. He called for a menu, not unkindly. When the server, a young man named Daniel who had been there longer than most, but never quite left the safe middle, brought it, Ethan smiled and asked a question that sounded like nothing and landed like everything. Do you speak other languages here? It was the sort of question that could be an innocent curiosity. It could be iced water. But the way he said it, the way his eyes scanned the room, his tone threaded with amusement, it felt like a needle. The lunch crowd flattened a little. Conversations dipped and rose around the new shape of attention. Grace felt a pull, Before she thought it through, her mouth answered without permission. A few. It was the truth. It was also a small rebellion. People rarely asked. When they did, it was often to exoticize, to string foreign words like costume jewelry. She had learned to meet curiosity with a guarded kindness. Ethan's smile widened. He reached into his briefcase and took out his phone as if to call someone, but then folded it closed and placed something else on the table. A crisp, white card with a single sentence printed in heavy black type. "I'll give you $100,000 if you serve me in Chinese," the card said. No flourish, no small print. The letters seemed to sit on the table, like a coin placed on a wound. Time does strange things in a small room. For a breath, the blue lantern felt like the eye of a camera. Patrons looked up. The father with the toddler paused with a carrot stick halfway to his mouth. Daniel's jaw tightened. Behind the counter, Grace's fingers left a wet ring on the mug. The card was ridiculous and precise. It carried the certainty of someone testing a hypothesis on human reactions. At first, people laughed, nervous, surprised laughs that were more defense than enjoyment. Ethan laughed too, but it had the quality of a man trying on a joke to see if it fit. "I like languages," he said, as if that explained everything. "It's a game I play sometimes. Bring me something interesting, and I'll reward it." The words arrived like knives and like coins, both insult and temptation. The public offer at a table in a diner was a demonstration dressed as play. It implied spectacle, and spectacle has its own appetite. Someone at the counter, a customer, or perhaps Daniel, Grace never learned which, raised a phone. The screen's tiny blue light blinked like a new moon. The camera found them. In 3 minutes, a half-mock challenge became a clip, then a clip became a caption. Then a caption became a pulse that beat outside the blue lantern. Grace's heart hammered a private rhythm that she kept under the counter. She had spent nights learning languages the way some people collect saint stories, quietly, faithfully, with a sense that one day they might mean something. Mandarin was the one that feathered itself against the inside of her throat when she slept. She had taught herself the tones from a battered tape she borrowed from a library and the patient mouth shapes of a coworker who'd come from Shanghai and laughed when she fumbled. 9 languages lived in her like small, patient animals. They were useful and quiet, never something she offered for sale. The offer on the card was charity and humiliation wearing the same suit. It suggested that her skill could be purchased as entertainment. It suggested a man's power to make a spectacle out of a life. Grace felt something cold step over her. She could have turned away. She could have wrapped herself in the blue apron and the daily arithmetic and filed the card in the same place she filed the landlord's letters. That would have been safe. Instead, she folded the towel and set it down slowly, the way you set down a decision. She went to the table and sat down opposite Ethan without asking permission. The diner's hum tightened into a silence that felt like a held breath. Patrons watched. Daniel hovered at a distance, uncertain. "You know I speak Chinese," she said. The words were softer than the card, but carried iron. Ethan's smile sharpened. "Do you?" he asked, like a man reading a price tag he expected to buy cheap. "I mean, prove it. Serve me in Chinese. I'll pay." There it was again, the wager. He framed it as a favor to the diner, an entertainment piece. He said it like a man who believed his money could turn anyone into a spectacle if he asked politely enough. Grace felt the recorder lights at the backs of several phones now. She felt the weight of her notebook in her apron pocket, the small map of letters she had stitched into quiet nights. She felt her mother's voice in a memory, steady and low, teaching her that dignity is not a thing you keep by hiding it, but by choosing when to show it. She could have refused. She could have walked away to the kitchen and let the afternoon return to its usual rhythms. Instead, she stood and did something that surprised both of them. She served his plate, but she did it in Mandarin, a careful, natural string of words that described coffee, milk, and an order of eggs. The words sat between them like a test of truth. For a moment, Ethan looked pleased. Then his expression changed in a thin, quick shift, the sliver of surprise that becomes calculation. He clapped his hands together in a small show of delight, as if the world had produced the exact spectacle he wanted. Someone in the back laughed. Ethan reached into his pocket and, with the same cool deliberation that had guided him so far, took out another card. He slid it across the table. "Very good," he said. "But this is better. Say it for the camera. Say it in Mandarin about me. Show people how well you can do when given money." The request was something else entirely. To speak in a language about him, to make him the center of her skill, to perform gratitude and subservience on demand. That was something like asking bread to bow. Grace's hands clenched unnoticed in the folds of her apron. The room smelled suddenly of lemon and iron, coffee and the tang of tension. She did not immediately answer. The camera lights flickered. A woman at the counter whispered, "This will be all over." Daniel's face had gone pale. The diner's manager, Mr. Andrews, whose anger usually lived like a grumpy clock behind his chest, came to the edge of the room and watched with the thin patience of someone choosing neutrality. In that stretched moment, the outer world rearranged itself. The card was not a kind offer. It was an audition under the guise of charity. It carried the shape of performance and the risk of being reduced to someone else's entertainment. It held knobs that could be turned: praise, pity, cash. It held the unseen wire of public opinion. The narrator sees, both close and far. I saw the heat under Grace's face, and the way her jaw worked like a closing door. I also saw the potential map that lay ahead, a shared video that would whirl beyond the blue lantern to feeds and timelines, to strangers with strong opinions who would not know the tenderness under her fingers or the reasons she had learned to say thank you in other tongues. I saw that the offer was not only about money. It was a hand extended to rearrange the terms of her dignity in public. Grace felt the old arithmetic of need press against the fresh knowledge of spectacle. There were bills to pay and pills to buy, and a mother who needed steady hands. There was also the knowledge that once words fell into the world like seeds, they sprouted in shapes you cannot always control. The card on the table seemed suddenly heavier. She put her hand over the card as if to hold it down. Her palm was cool against the white. Ethan's gaze held hers, interested and untroubled, as if he had not yet understood that he had crossed a line. Somewhere in the kitchen, the fry oil bubbled on, oblivious. When she spoke again, her voice held a calm that did not belong to the moment's surface. "I will not perform humiliation," she said. "I will speak what I know. I will not make myself small for a camera." It was a refusal and a boundary and a promise all at once. For a second, the room waited to see how the rich man would respond. He smiled in a way that was meant to be charming and, for the first time, carried an edge. "That's not how the world works, Ms. Mitchell," he said. "Sometimes the world requires a little show. Sometimes it rewards it." The recorder lights blinked on, and the diner held its breath. Outside the window, rain began to quicken, as if the sky, too, had decided to watch. The card remained between them like an omen. The lunch rush pressed against the glass, and a new story began to curl its fingers into something that had, until that afternoon, been ordinary and quiet. The day after the card, the blue lantern felt smaller and louder at the same time. People came in with the same quiet needs: coffee, a corner, a place to breathe. But a new sound threaded through their murmurs, a distant, buzzing curiosity. The clip had been posted before the rush was over. A 30-second loop that showed Ethan's card, Grace's folded towel, the look she gave when she put her hand over the paper. It did not show the reasons that living with care had taught her. It did not carry the nights she had spent learning Mandarin from a library tape or the bills stacked like bad weather on her kitchen table. It showed an angle. Angles make stories into things that can be sold. Daniel moved like someone trying not to be noticed. He had been at the Blue Lantern for 5 years, and in that time he had learned the rhythms that keep a small place running. When to call plates, when to let a regular have the same stool, how to make a joke land. He was younger than Grace by 2 years, and, despite the sameness of the job, he carried a quietly burning impatience that hummed under his smile. He liked to talk about leaving this place for something with glass and elevators and a title printed on a door. He wanted a life that looked less like stitches and more like a straight seam. "People are saying you turned him down," he said during a slow moment, refilling sugar as if his hands could smooth meaning into words. His voice had the cautious warmth of someone testing wind direction. Grace tied her apron tighter and watched the steam from a kettle. "I didn't turn down money, Dan," she replied. "I turned down being made small for someone else's amusement." "You could have taken it," he said. "Think what you could do. Rent Sarah's meds. You could breathe for a month." She looked at him. The tilt of his head held something like hope and something like something else she could not name. "I can breathe," she said. "It's not always the same as living." Daniel's eyes dropped. The weight between them was not exactly resentment, more like a disappointment shaped by expectation. He had thought their world had been agreed upon. Work hard, help each other, someday step out. But Grace carried a stubbornness he did not expect. It was not the refusal that surprised him so much as her refusal to let spectacle buy their privacy. Mr. Andrews listened from the floor where he filed receipts like a man keeping a ledger of small mercies. He had a face that softened and hardened with the weather. "The clip's doing numbers," he said without looking up. "It's mostly dumb jokes and comments. But people like the idea of a rich man testing someone. Makes good theater." "You want theater here?" Grace asked, feeling the burn of the day's tension under her skin. Mr. Andrews shrugged. "Publicity's publicity. If it brings lunch, I'm not picky. But don't make me regret letting him sit here." There was an unreadable line in his voice. It could have been tiredness, or a fear that the diner's simple routines might be twisted into something he couldn't fix. He had his own ledger, bills, taxes, a roof with slow leaks. Business was a language he spoke with his jaw set. His neutrality had edges. Outside, the clip folded into the city's talk. Some comments cheered Ethan for his charm. Others mocked the offer as cruel. Still others, the cruelest of all, sent messages that read like questions. Who does she think she is? Why won't she keep quiet for money? Suddenly strangers had opinions about a woman who had mopped the floor of their mornings and remembered how they took their coffee. That evening, after the diner closed and the vacuum hummed like a small animal in the corner, Grace sat at the tiny table in her apartment and opened her notebook. The languages lay there like small lights, phrases, tones, little translations. She wrote slowly, in English and in Mandarin, tracing characters with a pencil worn at the eraser. Her hands trembled only a little. The money was not just numbers on a page. It was a possibility, an easing of teeth-grinding pressure. It could mean a week of stable breathing, a bottle of pills paid on time, the electricity not blinking at dinner. Her phone vibrated. A message from Sarah. "Don't let anybody make you feel less." Her mother's words were spare, but full of the same temper as hers. Taught by years, when pride had been the only warm thing they could afford. Grace swallowed. She thought of the way Sarah had smiled with thinner hair, how she still kept a sweater Grace had knitted years earlier, threadbare at the cuffs. The next day, Ethan returned. He sat at the counter this time, closer to the staff, like someone testing a machine by touching its inside. He spoke to Daniel politely, complimented the coffee with the practiced manner of a man who knew how to flatter service into compliance. When Grace brought his coffee, he smiled in a way that asked for trust. "You were courageous yesterday," he said softly, as if they were having a private conversation in a crowded room. "You held a line that matters to you. That's rare." Grace felt the words as a soft pressure pushing the edges of her armor. "Courage is making hard choices," she said, "not performing them." Ethan laughed, a small sound. "We could make a different kind of offer," he suggested. "One that doesn't make you small. A scholarship, perhaps. Or a platform. Think of the things you could teach. Language opens doors. His tone had the shape of generosity. But the narrator who watches from a distance notes the hinge. His generosity came wrapped in an audience. His words smelled faintly of strategy. He offered scales that glittered without showing the fulcrum. Grace listened cautious. Money and opportunity were not the same thing. You have people watching you now, he added. You could use them. You could grow something from this. He left the line open, the bait obvious and soft. Daniel watched their exchange like someone trying to hold a watch still to see its gears. His impatience looked different now. It had the fine grain of vulnerability. He wanted more than a paycheck. He wanted to be part of something that meant he was rising. Watching Grace be offered a platform, something that might lift her and, by extension, him, kindled a hope he hadn't admitted even to himself. Over the next few days, tensions braided into routines. A woman who had once asked Grace to teach her French offered to pay for a private lesson. Someone left a note praising her dignity. Anonymous messages, sharp and cruel, kept coming too. The diner became a battleground of small decisions. When to post a friendly response, when to ignore, whether to accept offers that smelled like theater and not help. At night, when the city quieted and the blue lantern's neon bowed out like someone turning off a lamp, Grace and Daniel would split the leftover pie and talk. He spoke about moving out, about saving, about a cousin who had a room free for a month. Grace listened and told him stories of her library tapes, of a teacher who had shown her how to shape a Mandarin tone by humming along to a train's rhythm. She sensed his hope and did not dismiss it. But there were moments she could feel a thread tugging at things she held dear. Daniel once joked about what he would do if he had a camera and a video went viral. He laughed, but it dimpled the air in a way that made Grace's spine stiffen. People, when they get a camera, sometimes choose spectacle over empathy. She had seen it in the comments. She had felt it in the look Ethan had given when he slid another card across the table. I watched them both, the friend and the woman who kept quiet power in her voice. From a distance, their practices looked like the normal whereof two people trying to keep a small life afloat. Up close, Grace's decisions were a ledger of dignity. How much to bend, how much to hold. Daniel's hunger was understandable and, in its small way, dangerous. Hunger can make people trade things they later regret. One evening, as rain smudged the street lights into smears of gold, Daniel admitted something he had kept in his pocket like a coin. If someone offered me a chance to leave, he said, voice low, I might take it. I don't know if I'd tell you. Grace put down her fork. The confession was not a betrayal yet, but it sat among them like a loose tooth. Trust is kept in many small acts. Sometimes it is broken by a single choice that looks like survival. Grace looked at him and felt the slow, certain ache of knowing that people will bend when pressure finds their seams. She thought of Ethan's hands, smooth as if he had never had to wipe a spill at 2 a.m. She thought of Mr. Andrews's ledger of small mercies and of Sarah's thin sweater. The city kept moving. The clip kept folding into other clips. The invitations and insults grew in equal measure. Underneath it all, a quieter thing grew, a question about what would be given up to get what they needed. The answer had not arrived yet, but its shadow was already in the room. The alley behind the blue lantern smelled of cold grease and wet cardboard. Night pressed close, the neon from the diner painting everything a tired blue. Grace had meant only to fetch her notebook, one more page of characters, one more careful line before sleep. She moved through the kitchen like someone threading a needle, quiet, practiced, careful not to wake the city. Daniel's jacket was draped over the chair by the mop sink. His phone lay face down on the counter, the screen dark like a lake at midnight. It was foolish to pick it up, and yet her hand did. She told herself it was curiosity. She told herself it was a kind of small inventory. Who owed what? Who had what left? The phone unlocked with a thumbprint, a folded open gate to all the private small things people leave behind. There was a chain of messages with a number she didn't know. The first ping said, "Payment sent." The second, "He made it interesting today." Third, "More tomorrow?" There were photos. 2 frames of the diner, the table by the window, Ethan's suit. One image was the clip, cropped and tagged, with comments already mapped out in a long scroll. A receipt screen showed a transfer, a few £100 or dollars, sent from a name that matched a number. The words hit Grace like cold water. Daniel had told her he wanted out. He had said maybe he would take an offer. She had heard it and folded it away like laundry, a fear of what might happen if hunger met opportunity. She had not expected this. A sound behind her made her turn. Daniel stood in the doorway, shadowed. He did not speak at first. The kitchen hummed, the sound of the fridge like a distant heart. He looked younger than the phone messages made him feel. Up close his eyes were tired, and there was a shame that made his hands small and quick. "You shouldn't be looking at that," he said finally, voice flat. Grace held the phone like a thrown thing. "Why did you post it?" His mouth opened and closed. He had no lie ready that would smooth the edges. I didn't post it. I posted another clip. Ethan, he asked me to tag it. He paid. I needed." His words came fast, as if speed could mend them. "I needed cash, Grace. My aunt, she's sick. I owe my cousin. I thought if I helped get his attention, maybe he'd do something big. He said he would help. He said could be a platform for us." A platform. The word sounded suddenly cheap in the damp air. Grace had heard it before, promises disguised as opportunities. Ethan's voice on the phone, the slow brand of his smile, those were not the same as friendship. "You sold me," she said. The accusation was small, given what she felt. The kitchen tasted of metal where her words met him. Daniel's face crumpled. "I didn't mean to sell you. I didn't mean for him to make it about humiliation. I thought we'd do it our way. I thought he'd give us a chance." He showed me a folder of videos he'd made with other people. He said he'd set up a scholarship, get us out. I wanted out, Grace. I wanted the job at the place in the towers. I wanted us to breathe. Breathing. It was the small, human thing that had nudged him into danger. He had said it before, the secret that lived in his mouth like a coin. Now the coin had weight. Grace thought of nights she worked 3 shifts, of Sarah's pills, of the thin sweater. She thought of Daniel's hope like something gentle and dangerous. "You told him things?" Her voice shook. The question was not only about the clip. It was about trust, about the shadows that move when people barter with one another's lives. He swallowed. "No, not about Sarah. I told him how you speak 9 languages. I told him you'd hum if he played the right note. I told him you had pride. I told him you would probably refuse to do something humiliating. I told him you had limits. I thought knowing limits would make him respect you more. I don't know what I thought." The admission was a stone dropped into a still pond. The water spread in circles that reached the edges of everything they had built. It was worse than the clip. It was the proof that someone they trusted had shown the pattern of their life to a man who traded in spectacle. Daniel had not only revealed her skill, he had set a price on how it could be used. "What did he promise you?" Grace asked, though the answer had already been offered in the message thread. "Payment sent." "More tomorrow?" The thought of more made a thin, bitter laugh leak from her. "A job. A place to train. Money. He said he would make something out of it for both of us," Daniel said. The list sounded like a child's prayer. It did not match the fine print of life. Grace thought of Ethan's card again. "I'll give you $100,000 if you serve me in Chinese." A ridiculous sentence on paper, a weapon when folded into people's lives. The card had been a test. Daniel had turned that test into a contract with someone who could buy a story. He had not understood, perhaps, that appetites like Ethan's do not feed, they hollow. "You think you can fix this?" she asked him. The question was not only whether he could patch the public wound, but whether their private stitchwork could be repaired. Betrayal is not erased by money. It does not disappear because one person says sorry while another pats their own wallet. Daniel's answer was thin at first, then honest in its smallness. I can try to make it stop. I can tell him to take down the rest. I can ask for the money back. I can quit and leave. I can go. Go. The word had been a promise for him, a path out. For Grace, it had been a sharp thing. Go to where? To the apartments with towers? To a life that might cost her dignity? His leaving felt like a wound that would not heal quickly. You already left, she said. The sentence was simple, a clean blade. You left when you chose his money over our trust. He flinched. Grace. You made me a show, she said, and the anger that rose in her did not feel like the petty heat of a moment. It was colder, precise. People will think I begged. People will think I'm grateful. You gave them a story they wanted and sold out the truth. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor, head in his hands. I'm sorry, he said again and again. The apology was a bandage over a deep cut. From the doorway, Mr. Andrews watched without stepping in. He had never been a man to play at moralizing. He worked ledgers and kept the coffee hot. But his silence now sat like a judgment. The night hummed around them, and Grace felt suddenly very small in the way that long loyalty can make you. Outside somewhere a phone buzzed. The message thread kept going. Likes, shares, a new comment. The clip would not die easily, because once something goes into feed, it grows limbs of its own. Ethan did not need to push. The world would do the work. Daniel had not only handed over a clip, he had started a movement. Whether that movement would help or hurt, whether Ethan would keep his promises or pocket the money and walk, those things lay like dark seeds. Grace left the kitchen without her notebook. She stood by the window for a long time, breathing in the cold that moved through the street. The city was a map of lights and small betrayals. Tonight she felt both its warmth and its hard edges. She had once thought that language gave her a kind of armor, words that made her seen, but not owned. Now she saw how easily that armor could be handed to someone who wanted to display it. The betrayal altered the map of trust she had been walking. Daniel's confession did something else, too. It told her that the danger was not only external. People you feed with kindness can, when hunger presses, become the very tool that cuts you. It was a truth that felt both old and bone-sharp. She thought of Sarah and the pills and the rent notices and the way hands shake when they keep too many small fears. The path forward narrowed and divided. She could confront Ethan publicly, fight him with an honesty that would make the cameras fling themselves at the wound. She could cut Daniel out and step alone. She could accept a different offer. Or she could do none of those things and let the tide move as it would, finding the current and learning to swim. For now, the betrayal sat between them like a thorn. Grace listened to Daniel's soft, ragged breathing and felt the ache of what had been lost. She felt, too, the sharpness of a new edge. Everything had changed. The world had learned her name in a way she did not choose. The next move would have to be one she chose, and that thought steadied her like a slow, returning tide. The city began to feel like a thing that could be read wrong at a glance. The clip multiplied itself. Different edits, different captions, new voices arguing about her motives. Some wrote pity. Some wrote praise. Some wrote cruel things that called her names she had never heard spoken in her presence. The Blue Lantern's door jingled with people who wanted to witness the woman from the video and leave an opinion like a tip. The diner leaned under the weight of attention, as if its little frame might bend. Grace moved through the crowd of gazes like a person carrying a secret lamp. She kept it low, careful not to let the flame become a beacon for every wind. But every wind had found that lamp. Calls came, offers of interviews, requests for lessons, and a stranger who offered to help monetize her languages. There were kind messages, too. Someone wanted to sponsor Sarah's medication for 3 months. A small community group wanted to set up free lessons at the library. Those notes felt like hands reaching through the noise, warm and real. They made the arithmetic of need less sharp for a moment. Yet the louder noise was darker. Anonymous accounts reposted the clip with mocking captions. A hashtag trended that flattened her into a caricature. Someone found an old photograph of her and wrote a mean caption under it. A few regulars no longer came because they were tired of the pity or the spectacle. Mr. Andrews counted receipts like a man checking a pulse. With each passing day, the diner made less money. People watched the story and then stopped coming in, or they came in only to stare. Daniel's guilt lay on him like a second uniform. He tried to move with the same lightness he had before, but the hunger he had felt returned with new teeth. Ethan's messages grew more insistent. He had called Daniel twice, his voice smooth as a clear river that hides deeper currents. "We want to help," Ethan had said. "But it helps if the pieces move in the right order. We can set up interviews. We can put you in contact with people at the agency. Trust me." Daniel wanted to trust him. He also wanted to keep his job at the Blue Lantern until he could leave with something real in his pockets. The pulls of need and hope made him restless and reckless in equal measure. At night, he stayed up composing polite emails to Ethan that tried to balance gratitude and caution. He wrote drafts and erased them, then copied what he chose into a message he would not send until morning. Grace watched him and felt a new, sharper fear that he might trade more than their privacy next. She caught him sometimes staring at the door as if waiting for a new opportunity to walk in and change everything. "Don't let him lead you," she told him once in a low voice while they cleared plates. "If he promises the world, ask for the map." Daniel looked at her as if the map might already be folded in his pocket. "I'm trying," he said. "I don't want to hurt you." "You already did," she replied, and her voice was quiet because loud anger would only make everything louder outside. "You gave him the key to our story. That's not something you can buy back with promises." Outside the Blue Lantern, someone taped a flyer to a lamppost. "Come see the waitress who speaks 9 languages." The words were printed in large block letters, as if to make sure nothing subtle remained. Grace ripped down the flyer when she saw it, fingers trembling as she balled the paper into her hand. A small crowd watched her do it, some sympathetic, some eager, some bored. She felt the weight of being both an object of curiosity and a whole person who had to decide what to do next. Her phone kept buzzing with offers. One message came from a local law student who said she wanted to help pro bono. Another was from a small production company that asked if she would sign a release to let them use her image in a series about inspiring survivors. The paper of that invitation smelled like opportunity and like a contract. The legal language hid itself in gentle terms: platform, exposure, reach. But the shapes of those words felt like nets that could catch and not release. Grace found herself waking before dawn, staring at the notebook where she had written Mandarin characters in neat, patient lines. She loved the languages not because they could get her money, but because they opened a window into other lives. Now they felt like currency. She had learned them in small rooms with borrowed tapes and a woman at the library who hummed vowels like lullabies. She had never imagined they would be auctioned in public. The dilemma settled into her like cold stone. Use them in the way the world asked and risk being shown as an oddity, or keep them as private tools and watch as strangers decide what she deserved. The arithmetic of need did not go away. Bills did not read morality. Sarah still needed steady medicine. The landlord still left yellow notices tucked under their door. One night, a plain envelope appeared on the Blue Lantern's counter after closing. No name, no return address. Inside was $50 and a note for the woman who refused. Keep speaking. The handwriting was careful and sure. The money was small and honest. It warmed Grace more than a larger, showy gift might have. It spoke of someone who saw dignity, not spectacle. But gifts like that live in a different ledger than the offers that come with cameras. The envelopes that come with strings attached carry a different weight. Ethan's messages arrived differently now, polite, layered. He suggested a recorded interview with a presenter he claimed was respectful. He offered to underwrite an evening class at the community center. He suggested carefully an exclusive deal. He would produce a short documentary about Grace's languages if she agreed to be represented by his contacts. The representation, he said, would bring long-term security. The choice sat like a fork in a dim hallway. If she accepted Ethan's exclusive offer, she might get money and steady work and perhaps a platform that meant Sarah's pills would arrive on time. But she would also entrust her story to a man who had once tried to buy her serving him in Mandarin like a show. She would be giving him the steering wheel. The narrator that watches both close and far saw what the calm voice could not. Ethan's network was not built for kindness, but for attention. He had built a small industry of turning private lives into clicks. The impartial observer noted how easily that machinery could bend stories into shapes they were not meant to hold. The empathetic voice felt in the marrow how tempting a hand like his could be when the roof leaks and the pharmacy waits. Then came another blow. A comment thread surfaced naming Mr. Andrews as complicit. Did he accept money? Did the diner benefit? Rumors spread that he had agreed to let Ethan film inside the Blue Lantern for a fee. People called for boycotts. Customers that had once adored the place chose sides. Mr. Andrews, a man whose pride was wrapped tightly around the diner like thread around a spool, stood behind the counter and watched his life's work become contested property. He had to decide whether to fight for the story on his terms or to sell that story to save the roof. His choice was a new pressure on Grace. If he accepted money from Ethan for filming, it would look like she had agreed, whether she had or not. If he refused, the diner might sink under the losses it had already felt. He argued that survival sometimes required hard choices. He said quietly, "This city eats the quiet places first." Grace felt the world compress to a few sharp options. Confront Ethan and risk having him double down, making her look small in front of thousands. Take his offer and watch as her life was shaped by people who valued spectacle. Cut Daniel out, which would leave her alone in the kitchen and perhaps stronger, or forgive him and risk being betrayed again. Each path had costs measured not only in money, but in the slow erosion of trust and the possibility of losing who she believed herself to be. At night, she walked the streets with the city lights like soft teeth. Thoughts crowded. The moral line between using someone's offer and selling one story. Whether deception to catch deception was justified. Whether privacy could be reclaimed once the world tasted the salt of a public scandal. She rehearsed conversations with Ethan, with Mr. Andrews, with Daniel. She imagined denials, reconciliations, lawsuits, and, for a moment, a simple teacher's room where she taught 9 students how to roll a Mandarin tone. The simple image steadied her. A small classroom, patient faces, no cameras. But the world on the feeds did not move toward quiet. It clawed forward, hungry for the next angle. Grace understood, with the slow certainty of someone who has kept both watch and ledger, that the next move would not only decide her money, it would decide the shape of her life. She would have to choose whether to fight with words and law, or to fight with performance and compromise. Either way, the cost would be counted in something that measured more than dollars. The night, they said the cameras would come. Rain fell in slow, heavy sheets that turned the street into a smear of light. The Blue Lantern's neon halo trembled as if the sign itself were anxious. Phones in pockets felt like small, hot things waiting for permission. The crew arrived with a polite tremor of industry. Cases, cables, people who smiled in the practiced way of people who make other people's stories into shows. Ethan walked in like a man who had practiced how to own a room. His smile was the kind cut small enough to fit a camera lens. Grace stood behind the counter and watched the room assemble itself into 2 things at once. A place trying to hold its ordinary breath, and a stage being built for something else. She had rehearsed what she might say 1,000 ways, quietly, angrily, with humor, with law. But rehearsals are bones. Real courage is a muscle you find when the world asks for payment in other people's shame. Her hand rested on the notebook in her apron, the pages that held a patient map of sounds and strokes. That book had been her private country. Tonight it would be a border she might defend. Daniel came in last. His face had the rawness of someone who had slept little and thought more. He had agreed to meet her before the cameras rolled. His voice when he spoke was small. I told him I could help manage things, he said. I told him I'd take down clips if he asked. I thought I could control it. You made the choice, she answered, not loud, because the microphones already thrummed. You chose his money before our truth. He flinched. The man who watched from the corner, Mr. Andrews, folded his hands like a person trying to close a wound. The impartial observer would note the ledger in his eyes, the cost of a roof, the math of survival. The empathetic voice felt the hunger that had bent his back over receipts for 30 years. He had, the night before, signed a tentative agreement with Ethan, thinking perhaps a film and a small fee could save the place. Now that agreement pulled at the diner like a rope. Ethan mounted a small riser with a bright grin and the kind of calm that comes with certainty. Tonight we celebrate language, he announced into a microphone that turned all small things into announcements. We'll show how culture brings us together. The cameras panned as if to prove the statement true. They recorded the opening lines, the polite applause that felt like a pretense, the glow of light on waiting faces. The law student who had offered to help, a woman named Claire, lingered near the entrance with a laptop bag like a shield. She had been quiet for days, gathering what she could, messages, receipts, a trail of emails that smelled faintly of bad faith. She caught Grace's eye and gave a small, steady nod. The narrator who watches both near and far registered the exchange as a signal, a quiet plan within the roar. Ethan's documentary tone was smooth, and his questions came like soft prods. Tell us how you learned, he said, folding his hands to suggest intimacy. The cameras closed as if to hug the moment. The feeds went live. 1,000 small rings of light, phones, took the room and sent it outward. Grace felt the public pressure like a tide moving against her ribs. She could have stood and recited the safe story. The tapes, the lessons, the love of language. It would have been true and neat. But truth can be shaped by performance. She had seen that in clips that cropped and cut until tenderness looked like pleading. Instead, she did something that the impartial observer would later call brave and the empathetic voice would call inevitable. If this is a celebration, she said, and her voice, into the microphone, sounded small and then not, I want to hear all of it. Ethan smiled like a man who owned the next sentence. Of course. We'll focus on the beautiful parts. Then play the messages Ethan sent to Daniel, she said. The room blinked. Cameras stuttered. Ethan's smile thinned. His face rearranged itself. Play them, she repeated, firmer now. Play the agreement that calls my consent something to be bought. Play the receipts. Let people hear how my life was traded. The sound guy hesitated. A murmur moved like wind. Claire stood and opened her bag. From it she removed a small speaker and a laptop. You asked for evidence, she said quietly, sliding the laptop to the technician. I have what the law would call a record. Ethan tried to laugh, the sound like a twig breaking. You can't, this is private, he said, the first crack of anger showing. Private. Grace asked, is it private when you upload it to millions of viewers? Is it private when you use it to profit? Claire clicked. A message thread spilled into the room. Ethan's messages, suggestive, transactional, precise, about clips, about making it interesting, about payments and exclusive rights. The room's bright lights reflected off screens and onto faces. The feed that had been tuned to celebrate shifted in its rhythm. People who had come for the spectacle now saw a blueprint. Daniel's face went pale enough to be seen from the street. He had been the hinge. Now he was the doorway swung open. He tried to speak, to explain, but the sound of his voice was swallowed by the space between what he had hoped and what he had done. Mr. Andrews stood then, a weight moving into the center of the room. His voice, when he spoke, was not like a man reciting accounts. "I signed a paper that said filming would be controlled," he said. "I thought it would be fair. I thought I could keep it small. I didn't know he'd do this." He looked at Ethan with something like sorrow, and then at Grace with something like apology. "I tried to protect us. I failed." Ethan's mouth formed a line. The cameras kept rolling, because cameras always do. But the narrative had shifted. The impartial observer notes how quickly power rearranges itself when its plans leak into daylight. The empathetic voice hears the small, human sounds that follow. Daniel's apology, choked. Mr. Andrews' regret. The audience's confusion. Ethan pushed, then, the next move of a man who had been practiced in swallowing consequences. He stood and called the event off, called security, and tried to spin the exposure into a claim of invasion. But Claire had already recorded messages that tied Ethan to earlier projects where people had been shamed for views and views turned into revenue. The production company that backed him had a record. When she offered those emails to the small assembly, the once polished veneer began to flake. In the bright, messy center of the diner, Grace did something she had not planned. She spoke in Mandarin. The words were not for spectacle, but for truth. She addressed Ethan in a language he had used as a tool, the language he had tried to commodify, and told the story of how she had learned languages to build bridges, not stages. Her voice in Mandarin carried the surprise of a room. A man hearing his plan described in a tongue he'd tried to make into a prop. Then she switched, one by one, into Spanish, French, German, each language a small beacon of the lives it represented. She asked a question in each tongue. Did you ever think about the person these words belong to? The effect was not rhetorical flourish. It was a living argument made of tongues and memory. Cameras that had come hungry for a show caught, instead a woman returning the shape of her life to herself. Daniel wept openly then. Not the theatrical kind of tears that bring likes, but soft and ashamed. He took Grace's hand and said simply, "I'm sorry. I thought I could fix it." His apology was a cracking thing, but it was honest. The crowd, a swaying mix of those who had come for the spectacle and those who had come for the food, shifted. Some left in anger. Some stayed, blinking at a new truth. Mr. Andrews closed the register and stepped outside to speak to people who had brought cameras of their own. A few older patrons came forward, took Grace's hands, and told her they knew her as the woman who had always listened, who had taught a boy to say thank you in French when he was small. The city, for all its appetite, still had people who remembered what kindness looked like without a feed. Ethan left with a storm of aborted interviews and angry texts. The production company called damage control. Later, a reporter would ask whether his projects had ever harmed people for clicks. Later still, the emails Claire had produced would be proof for a complaint. The impartial observer would note that public exposure does not always equal justice, but it can unmake a carefully constructed tale. When the last light dimmed and the crowd thinned, Grace stood on the threshold of a different kind of future. Claire offered to help with legal counsel and to connect her with a community center that wanted to fund language classes that would not be sold to the highest bidder. Small donations arrived, envelopes like steady hands. Mr. Andrews, face lined in the neon wash, promised to make the diner a place that would host those classes. Daniel, raw with regret, asked for a chance to make amends and to work without cameras until trust could be rebuilt. Grace thought of Sarah and the pills and the nights of counting bottles and bus fare. She thought of dignity as something gained in small ways, not a headline. The empathetic narrator felt the relief in her shoulders, as if she were being given air after a long dive. The impartial observer recorded the facts. Ethan's production faced scrutiny. The diner kept its doors. A community offered an alternative. But the end was not a tidy ledger. Rent still had to be paid. Sarah still needed medicine. The flows of life did not rearrange themselves because one man's plan had cracked. The moral linger. Dignity can be defended, but it costs work, and the public that watched can be both ally and predator. Grace closed her notebook that night and placed it gently on the counter. She had not won everything, and she had not lost the small hard things that shape a life. She had, however, reclaimed the narrative. In the months that followed, the Blue Lantern became a quiet classroom on some evenings, and Grace taught not for likes, but for the small, steady work of building something that would not be sold. Daniel stayed, and in time his hands learned to make amends the way you learn to build a shelf. Careful, honest, slow. The city kept spinning. Cameras found new stories. But in a small diner with a crooked neon sign, a woman folded languages into lessons, and people came to listen. The world outside is hungry and loud. Inside, a different hunger fed a different kind of life. The question the story left, what do we trade for shelter, for medicine, for opportunity, hung like a coin in the air. Grace had traded nothing. She had chosen what to keep. The months after the cameras left felt like slow knitting, small, slow stitches that, in time, made something warm. The Blue Lantern kept its crooked neon and the same chipped mugs, but the way light fell across the counter changed. People who had come for the spectacle did not return in the same numbers, but others came who had watched the night of the confrontation and wanted to help in ways that did not carry a camera. Claire brought records and a steadiness that smelled of law books and late-night coffee. She helped file complaints and talked to local reporters who were more curious about accountability than clicks. It was not a clean victory. Ethan's name did not evaporate overnight, but his plan for profit from other people's lives cracked when recorded messages and emails made the truth hard to sell. Grace kept teaching. The first class she agreed to host was small. 6 people from the neighborhood, a handful of teenagers, one older man who came because he wanted to speak to his granddaughter in another language. She wrote the syllabus on a paper plate and pinned it to the bulletin board behind the counter. The languages she taught were not performance pieces. They were ways to open doors, to call someone by their true name, to quiet fear with a simple, correct pronunciation. Mr. Andrews rearranged the schedule so the diner could host these lessons twice a week. He joked, sometimes, about how the Blue Lantern had become a university of small things. But he was proud, too, in the deeper way of a man who has kept a roof over many heads for years. He patched the leaky corner of the roof with his own hands and some money he had tucked away for real emergencies. The community had left envelopes on the counter. Small, steady donations, no strings attached. People who owned shops nearby chipped in. It was not the $100,000 on the card, but it paid rent and kept the lights on. And for Grace, that steady breathing felt like a miracle. Daniel stayed. He worked his shifts and then stayed after to sweep and set up chairs for classes. He learned the harder work of quiet repair, saying sorry again and again in small gestures, showing up, listening, taking tasks without being asked. He helped translate flyers, made coffee for students, and sometimes sat in the back, learning a new language himself. The thing he had broken was not fixed by a single apology. It was mended slowly, like frayed rope braided anew. Grace did not forget. She forgave in time because she saw the slow shape of his trying, not a performance, but a steady movement towards making right. Sarah got her pills on time. A local charity, nudged by Claire and a few people who had watched the diner struggle, stepped in to help with prescriptions for 3 months. Grace cried that night, not from shame, but from a tired kind of relief. The money had not solved every worry, but it had bought a little sleep and a little space to breathe. The legal process was messy. It was also important. Claire's records showed patterns, messages that framed people as willing participants and contracts that promised rights to footage in language crafted to confuse. The production company issued statements that read like careful nets, no admissions, just promises of review. Some smaller partners backed away when reporters asked direct questions. Ethan hired lawyers and tried to spin a narrative of misunderstanding, but in the small courts of public opinion and local regulation, his methods looked brittle. The impartial voice would note how slow systems can be. The empathetic voice knew how necessary every slow, stubborn step of the law could be for someone's dignity. Grace found herself thinking often about what it means to own a story. She had once thought that privacy was simply a shutter you could close. Now she knew it was an active practice, choosing where the shutters open, to whom, and why. There was a seam between needing help and selling a part of yourself. The seam was thin and easy to miss until you felt the tug. One evening, after cleaning the counter, she sat with her notebook and wrote in Mandarin until her hand ached. She wrote because she loved the shapes the characters made on the page, because language still felt like a private joy that no camera could fully take. But she also wrote because she wanted to plan lessons, a small pamphlet to give students, a path that could keep her working without being turned into someone else's brief. People asked if she regretted refusing Ethan's money. Her answer was never simple. "If I had taken it," she said once to Claire while they stacked chairs, "the world might have thought I traded dignity for pills and rent. But dignity costs work, not headlines. I needed more than money." The empathetic voice in me heard the fatigue under that sentence and the small, fierce pride in her face. That pride did not make choices easier. There were nights when the landlord's footsteps came like echoes at the door and the bills stacked like small judgments. There were offers, again and again, agents, producers, people who wanted a story that would fit their feed. Grace learned to say no as carefully as she once learned tones. She said yes to lessons and small community grants that insisted on no camera, only classrooms. She said no to exclusive contracts that wanted control of her image. In giving classes, she carved a way forward that felt honest. Students learned phrases, yes, but they also learned how words could protect them. A teenage girl told her that learning to speak someone else's name, well, made her feel brave. An older man said that learning a few lines of Spanish helped him speak to a bus driver who had once ignored his greetings. Small things, multiplied, kept weight from piling on a single person. Daniel's slow work of repair became part of a story he lived with. He and Grace had days of quiet that were not tender but were real, cleaning together, sharing a joke about a student's funny accent attempt, arguing in short bursts that ended with shared coffee. Trust, they learned, is not a single act, but a life of proof. The city continued to be hungry for spectacle, and sometimes that hunger turned its gaze elsewhere. Ethan's name settled into other stories, court notices, PR statements, small threads of anger and defense. Some people never changed their minds, and some would always prefer the cheap thrill of seeing someone made small. The impartial observer notes that public curiosity is fickle. It is both dangerous and, occasionally, corrective. The empathetic voice feels the cost of that fickleness in the slow work of rebuilding. In the end, the question that lived with Grace was not whether she had won. It was how she would live with the choice she had made. She had kept the things that mattered to her, her way of speaking, the homework of caring for Sarah, the quiet dignity she refused to sell. She had also learned the truth about the world's appetite. It was a hard lesson, that even when you are right, you must prepare for the long road of repair. On a soft spring night, a small ceremony was held at the Blue Lantern. It was not for cameras. Claire organized it, not for headlines, but to say thanks to people who had kept the place afloat. People brought food. A child sang a stumbling song in Mandarin, and Mr. Andrews served coffee with hands that trembled a little from age and pride. Daniel spoke, not with brilliant words, but with a voice that trembled and mended. "I'm sorry for giving away what was yours. I will spend the rest of my days trying to earn back what I broke." The room clapped, not because it was a performance, but because it was a witness. Grace listened and felt the weight of the months settle into a shape she could carry. She looked at Sarah across the room, smiling, steady, and then at the students who had come. She felt the kind of tiredness that means work has been done, and the kind of hope that means work will continue. The final lesson she taught months later was about choices. She told her students that words are tools and also shields, that learning a language builds bridges, but also asks you to guard the crossing. She taught them how to say, "I deserve to be treated with respect," in Mandarin and in Spanish and in French. Because sometimes the first thing you must do to protect yourself is to speak it loud enough to believe it. When the lesson was over and the chairs were stacked, she closed her notebook and stepped outside into the cool night. The neon sign blinked above the diner, imperfect, stubborn, and she smiled. The world would still be hungry, loud, and sometimes cruel. But inside that crooked little place, she had found a way to keep the light on, to teach, and to choose. That choice was not a grand ending. It was a steady beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.